Health and fitness requires more than just the physical work. It starts with the work you put in to grow your mind. Welcome to the Mind Gains podcast, where we discuss what it takes mentally to see results physically. I'm your host, Jess. Let's get started. I woke up this morning with just the worst allergies. I'm talking major congestion, sneezing, my eyes will not stop watering, all that good stuff. And I thought about just holding off on recording this episode because I didn't want to be putting my nasally voice into your ears, but I also don't know when else I'm really going to have the time to sit down and record this, and I definitely don't want to skip out on a week. So here we are. Please bear with me today as I sniffle my way through this. If you're like I was before I really got into health and fitness, I had no clue that there were different phases to this journey. I remember the first time I heard the phrases cutting and bulking, and I was like, what? Who? I had no idea what any of that meant because I just thought you go to the gym, eat a little better, and then you'll have your dream physique, right? But this is probably not the case for many of us. Unless you're just strictly looking to be a little healthier, maybe move your body more, you're probably going to want to go through a cutting phase, a bulking phase, all the good stuff at some point. Not everyone, but I think most people will because it's almost required, if not, very helpful at the very least, if you have a specific physical goal you want to reach. And I'll explain what I mean by that a little later. But first, I want to talk about what each of these phases are. And there are really 5 main phases you could go through, and you can and most likely should go through each of them multiple times. Because this is a lifestyle, we're going to be doing all of this for the rest of our lives. So it's probably very unlikely that you're going to go through one cutting phase and lose a little bit of body fat and then be done. Because typically what happens is we say we want to lose 15 pounds. And then we achieve that weight loss goal and everything's great. But then we want more. Now we decide it's time to put on some muscle mass. So how do we transition over to building some muscle when we were just in a fat loss phase? And then once we have put on some muscle, what do we do then? It can be very confusing if you don't know what each of these phases are and what the purpose behind them is. So I'm here to break it down for you. Starting off with a cutting phase, because this typically is the most popular one, if you were to go up to any random person on the street and ask them if they have one fitness goal, I can guarantee their response 99% of the time is going to be fat loss or weight loss. So let's go over what a cut is and when to utilize it. A cut or a cutting phase is strategically putting yourself into a calorie deficit to lose some excess body fat you got going on. Now, I don't think I really need to explain why we would want to do this. Like I said, I think most of us want to do this at some point or another. So I'm just going to jump straight into how to do this. In my opinion, an actual cutting phase is different from a longer term, larger fat loss goal. If you are someone who has more fat to lose, you're probably going to remain in a calorie deficit for longer because you have more to lose. But if you're already further along in your journey, maybe you put on some muscle mass and now you just want to kind of lean down for the summer because, you have your cousin's bachelorette party at the beach and you want to look good in a bathing suit, that's more so what a cutting phase is for. It's a more time sensitive, a bit more aggressive at times phase, and you're probably really only going to be cutting for around 3-ish months or so. Whereas again, with a larger fat loss goal, it really just depends on how much you have to lose. And it's maybe not as rigorous because you're more so doing it for your health and lifestyle purposes. So again, with an actual cutting phase, I'm referring to that roughly 3-ish month period of time where you're putting yourself into a slight calorie deficit to shed a little bit of excess body fat so you can reveal what's underneath, aka muscle mass. During a cut, you're exposing more of your muscle mass because you're eliminating or at least cutting down some body fat. So you're probably thinking, okay, great. Cutting sounds awesome. Why would I ever need to do any phase other than that? All I want to do is slim down, tone up, show off some muscle, and I'll be all set. Hold on. What happens a lot of the time is we tend to think we have a lot more muscle mass than we actually do. People put themselves into a cutting phase without ever having put on real muscle to begin with. And I am here to save you some time and tell you that unless you have intentionally spent time building muscle, you're probably going to be a little disappointed with the results of your cut because you're not going to have the muscle you thought you would. I'm not going to say that with, 100% certainty because we're all different and we all have a different idea in our head of what we want to look like. But this does happen very often that people do like an 8 week or a 12-week cut. And yes, they lose body fat, but then they're upset because they really just kind of look like a smaller version of what they previously did. They expected their cut to reveal their muscle when they didn't have much muscle in the first place to reveal. Building muscle is not easy. It takes a long, long time. So that's why I say, unless you've intentionally spent a good amount of time building it and knowing what it takes to build it, you probably don't have the amount you think you do. And that's not a slam on you. That's just, it happens to all of us. And this isn't me saying that unless you've built muscle first, you should not do a cut because that's not true. It just comes down to where you're currently at, what you've done previously, and what your goals are. So to each their own, but I just want to prepare you for what might happen if you rush going into a cut too early because it does happen quite a bit. So then how do we build muscle? In order to build muscle, you need to combine lifting weight and lifting heavy in the gym and eating in a calorie surplus. So to lose fat, you eat in a deficit. To gain muscle, you eat in a surplus, which is just eating over what your calorie maintenance is. Another way to put it is eating more calories than your body burns each day. And I talked about what maintenance calories are in one of my last episodes about calorie deficits. So if you haven't listened to that, I recommend you do because I also go over what maintenance calories are a little bit more in depth. It doesn't have to be a crazy surplus. I actually recommend it not be. You'll see some people out there eating like 5 or 600 calories over their maintenance in order to put on muscle, but this really isn't necessary. All you really need is 2 to 300 calories over, but ultimately this just comes down to personal preference. The reason I recommend a slight surplus is because the fact of the matter is when you eat in a surplus, you will put on muscle mass, but you will also put on some extra body fat along with it. It is pretty much unavoidable. I know no one wants to hear it. I'm right there along with you, but if you are eating in a surplus, this is just what happens. It's part of the process. If you only eat in a 2 to 300 calorie surplus, then the process for putting on muscle will take longer, but you won't put on as much body fat during that time because you're taking things slower. If you eat 5, 6, 700 calories over, yeah, you'll see the scale move up quicker. And some of it will probably be muscle if you're training right in the gym and eating enough protein, that is, but more fat will be added along with it. So it just comes down to what you want to do. But I personally recommend a 2 to 300 calorie surplus. Eating in a calorie surplus to put on muscle mass is considered a bulking phase or a building phase. I like the term building a lot more because a lot of women tend to kind of freak out when they hear the term bulking. But just because it's called a bulking phase does not mean you get bulky. Putting on muscle mass isn't what makes you bulky. And trust me, you want to have muscle, not only for aesthetic reasons because it looks nice, but for health reasons mainly. This is why then you'll see people going through a cutting phase, then a bulking phase, a cutting phase, a bulking phase, because they've done the bulking or the building phase and put on muscle. But with that muscle, they've also put on a little excess body fat because, again, it's not entirely avoidable. You can reduce the amount of body fat you put on by taking your bulk slower and staying in that slight surplus, but you will put on some extra body fat as well. Then they go into a cutting phase for a few months to get rid of the excess fat and reveal the muscle that's now there. This was something that I did not understand at all at first. Like I could not wrap my head around it. I saw these girls going into a bulk and putting on extra body fat, and I remember thinking, why? Why would you do that? You looked so good and you worked so hard to be where you were at. Why would you throw it all away? I had no clue. It's not that they're throwing it all away. If you have a physique goal or health goal that requires more muscle mass than you currently have, you got to build that muscle. It doesn't just appear. And that does not just happen by remaining in a calorie deficit. This is why it's so hard because a lot of people want to both build muscle and lose fat, which is totally fine. But these are almost opposite goals. And we tend to think that we can do both at the same time, but you almost have to pick whichever one is more important to you, attack that first, then move on to the other, and then repeat if you want to continue progressing from there. So, if you're someone who has been in a calorie deficit to lose body fat, but then you're frustrated because you're not seeing muscle gains at the same time, this is why. You will not build muscle if you're eating less than your caloric maintenance. Think about what happens during a cut when you are in that calorie deficit. You're purposefully giving yourself less food than your body actually needs, so it has to pull from what's already been stored in your body to burn for energy just to keep you alive. Do you think with all of that going on and not even having enough food to just sustain you, that it's even possible for your body to build anything? Building muscle happens when you have excess calories, not when you're giving yourself less than you need to strictly just survive. A bulking phase doesn't really have any time constraints on it. Like with cutting, you don't want to remain in a cut too long because A, your body will adapt to having less calories, and then you'll just have to continuously eat less and less and less to keep seeing progress. And B, being in a cut or a calorie deficit is a stressor to your body. It's not good for your health to remain here for an exorbitant amount of time. You need to give your body a break and almost like a reset so that you can take care of your health and also so that you can still see progress without having to get to a point of actually starving yourself. You really don't want to remain in a cut for more than like a few months at a time, whereas you could stay in a bulk for a year, maybe even longer. Really, you probably want to be staying in a bulk for around 6 to 12 months. Why? Because, like I said earlier, building muscle takes time. It takes a lot of time. So, if you just do like a mini bulk for like 1 to 3 months, you're not really going to see much muscle growth. On average, for men in their first year of dedicated training, they can gain about 15 up to 15 to 25 pounds of muscle. And then that drops to about, up to 10 to 15 pounds in their second year. For women, in our first year of dedicated training, we could gain up to 8 to 12 pounds of muscle mass, and then that drops to about 4 to 6 pounds the year after. Let me emphasize, this is after 1 full year of dedicated training. This means doing everything right with your lifts. Training intensity is where it needs to be, progressive overload is where it needs to be, nutrition is spot on for that entire year. You could gain maybe up to 8 to 12 pounds as a female lifting in her first year. And just being honest, most of us, myself included, are probably not working hard enough, especially not in our first year, to be able to achieve this. This is what I mean. Building muscle is hard. It's difficult. This is why when I hear women say they don't want to lift weights because they don't want to get bulky, it's ridiculous because honestly, you truly have no idea what it takes to build muscle. People are in the gym every day trying to put on this kind of muscle mass, and it takes years. You're not just going to start lifting weights on day one and then 2 weeks later look like the Incredible Hulk. That does not happen. So, in general, you're probably going to want to be in a building phase for about 6 months to a year at least in order to put on sufficient enough muscle to be able to even tell you've put on any once you shave some of that extra body fat off in your next cut. Once again, if you rush the process and only bulk for a couple months, you're probably going to be a little disappointed with your next cut because you don't have the muscle mass you thought you did. You don't have the defined, toned arms and legs you thought were hiding under the excess fat. So don't rush it. Like that is a good rule of thumb for all things in health and fitness. I've said it before, I'll say it again. There are no shortcuts. To fat loss, to muscle building, you cannot take any shortcuts. You cannot rush it. It takes time. There are no workarounds. Good things take time. Great things take even longer. Be patient. This is why I say you'll most likely go through each of these phases multiple times before getting to your ultimate goal. You're not just going to do one 3-month cut and look sculpted. You need to spend a good amount of time in each of these phases. Okay, so we know what cutting is, we know what bulking is, but do we just have to go back and forth between cutting and bulking for the rest of our lives? Absolutely not. You can and should remain at maintenance sometimes. Maintenance is exactly what it sounds like. You're eating at your caloric maintenance, so your calorie intake is matching what your body is burning every day. We need to be giving our bodies a break from time to time and allow it to go fully back to homeostasis where everything is nice and balanced and everyone is happy. The general rule of thumb here is that for however long you were in a cut for, you want to be at least in maintenance for that same amount of time, if not longer, before jumping back into another cut. If you were cutting for 3 months, you're going to want to be at least at your maintenance calories for 3 months before going back into another cut. Your body needs that time to recoup and recover because, again, being in a calorie deficit is a stressor to your body. So, you do need to spend time at maintenance. And honestly, this is the ultimate goal. This is what we're all kind of striving for because we all want to get to a point that we've reached our physical goals and then we can kind of just maintain that forever. You're probably not going to be cutting and bulking when you're 60, 70 years old. Hopefully, you've already done the hard work by that point and you can just maintain it and focus more on health goals at that time and live in your best life. And the reason I say you can go from a cut back to maintenance straight into another cut instead of moving over to bulking is because all of this is optional. Every single one of these phases is optional. There is no rule that says you must cut and you must bulk. If you want certain results, going through each of these phases is very helpful and almost required for certain physique goals. However, the way you go about this is completely up to you. There are people out there that are always eating at maintenance and do not cut or bulk. The reason I say almost is because there is something called body recomposition. This is another phase you can be in, and this is something you could do for a time and then switch over to cutting and bulking, or you could only ever do body recomposition if you wanted to. Some people do this. There are people out there that are lean and defined and have not once in their life done a cut or a bulk. Body recomposition is where you're eating at your caloric maintenance while strength training and lifting heavy, just like you would do in a bulk to gain muscle, because this piece does have to be there. Muscle doesn't just grow on its own, it has to be broken down first through placing a heavy load on it. But body recomp is the act of simultaneously losing fat and gaining muscle. And I know that right about now, everyone's probably thinking, oh, yeah, that's what I want to do. Why would anyone do anything other than that? Body recomp can take a lot longer. It can take a lot more time to see fat loss and muscle gains in a body recomposition, at least to a noticeable degree in the way we all want to, than it will cutting and bulking. So there are pros and cons to this. Obviously, with body recomp, you can work on two goals at one time, but as much as you have to be patient in a cut or a bulk, I feel like your patience has to almost be doubled in a body recomp because you're probably not going to notice nearly as many changes as quickly as you would, focusing on one goal at a time. And let's be real, for a lot of us, myself included, we want to see results ASAP, right? Typically, a big driving factor of being able to keep up with getting to the gym and hitting your nutrition targets and getting your protein in is seeing results from it. Body recomp doesn't usually show those results as quickly as a cut or a bulk does. Another thing about body recomp is that the scale really won't and shouldn't be changing much during this time. Because you're simultaneously losing fat and gaining muscle and eating at maintenance, your weight on the scale really won't change much aside from, normal fluctuations. And for a lot of people, this is hard because they want to see changes on the scale. It's not that this is a bad thing. I'm just giving you the facts because at the end of the day, what does the number on the scale actually mean if you look the way you want to look? If your health is where you want it to be, right? It doesn't matter at all. As a female, if you're used to seeing the scale say 120 pounds, but you have kind of that skinny fat look and your goal is to be defined and muscular, as long as you look defined and muscular and fit, does it matter if that scale says 110 pounds or 130? Not at all. And honestly, especially if you have a goal to put some muscle in your frame, I can almost say with 99.999% certainty that your goal weight weighs a lot more than you think it does. A lot more. You would be shocked to see some of these girls out here weighing 140, 150, and they look like they weigh about 120. So, kind of a tangent, but the number on the scale doesn't matter. So, if that's the reason you wouldn't pick a body recomp is because you need to see a smaller number on the scale, don't let that stop you. You could go through a body recomp, come out of it weighing the same as when you started, or sometimes, honestly, even a little more, and look like a completely different person. If you've never seen what a body recomposition can do, go ahead and look it up. Google search, look it up on Instagram, find people that have done this and just see for yourself because you would truly never guess that they weigh the same in both photos with some of them. And just to clarify something, because I know someone out there is thinking this right now, this isn't because muscle weighs more than fat. That is just not true. 10 pounds of muscle weighs the same as 10 pounds of fat. They're both 10 pounds. Like, I don't know where we're getting that 10 pounds of muscle somehow magically weighs more than 10 pounds of fat. It's just that the muscle is much more compact than the fat is. Think about it like the 10 pounds of muscle being a phone, right? It's small, it's compact, it's harder, and it doesn't jiggle around when you touch it or pick it up. Now think of the 10 pounds of fat being like a throw pillow on your couch or your bed. They're both going to weigh the same amount, but the pillow takes up a lot more space and is fluffier and squishier than your phone is. So if you removed that 10-pound pillow, aka fat, from your body, obviously the pillow isn't actually 10 pounds. We're just pretending for demonstration purposes. And then you replace it with the same 10 pounds, but coming from the phone, aka the muscle, you're going to weigh the same exact amount, but you're going to look completely different. You're going to look much more muscular and leaner. This is how body recomp works. The last phase to really talk about here is going to be reverse dieting. And this one right here is not talked about enough, in my opinion. The concept of reverse dieting was super confusing to me at first, but once I learned what it was and then went through one myself, things just started to make a lot more sense to me. I learned about cutting and bulking and all of that before ever hearing the words reverse diet. And one of my biggest concerns with cutting, and I know I'm not alone here, was, well, what do I do then once I'm done with my cut? How do I get out of a calorie deficit? Because the fact of the matter is, if you end your cut and then the following day jump back up to your maintenance calories, you're going to be putting on the excess body fat you just worked so hard to get rid of in your cut. If you jump up 3, 4, 500 calories overnight, you're not keeping the results of your cut, which is obviously not what we want. So let's just say you are in a 300 calorie deficit for the last few months. Your maintenance is 2,000 calories and you are eating at 1,700 calories, just for even numbers. You lost about 10 pounds and now you're ending your cut on a Sunday because you're ready to go on back up to maintenance for a little while. You should not move your calorie intake back up to 2,000 on Monday. What needs to happen instead is you need to slowly work your calories back up to that 2,000 number. Anywhere from around 50 to 100 calories. Maybe you could get away with 150 calories every 1 to 3-ish weeks. So on Monday, maybe you move your calories up to 1,750, then 1,800 the following week. Then you wait 2 weeks and move it up to 1,900 until you reach your maintenance again. This is how you keep the results of your cut, or at least most of them, while bringing your intake back up to a good spot. The reason I say most is because anytime you add in more calories, there is a slight chance that you will gain some of the weight back. But if you go nice and slow, you're going to really minimize this amount. And really, it's not optional to do this. You can't just stay in a cut forever because what happens is after a while, your body gets wise to the fact that you're now giving it less food and then it downregulates, meaning it slows the metabolism down. And now your maintenance calories are closer to your cutting number, in this case, 1,700 instead of 2,000. So now you have to decrease your calories even more. Maybe you bring them down to 1,500 this time. You see results for a little bit, but then your metabolism downregulates again. and now your new maintenance calories is at 1500. Do we see how detrimental this cycle is? We can't just continue to eat less and less and less. This is exactly why, right here, that so many people, women especially, say they're being more active and eating less than they ever have, and they're still gaining weight. It's because over time you have downregulated your metabolism, and now you have to continuously do more and more and more to see results. You can't just keep eating less. It will not end well for you. Because you eat less, your body adapts. And now it stops sending you hunger cues because it knows darn well you're not going to feed it. So it shuts that down so it can just focus on survival. Does that sound like a good position to be in for anyone? Not only are you going to be at a standstill for your results, but your health is now compromised. Your body needs food. It needs energy. And if you just decide to not give it what it's asking you for, it's almost like it does it out of spite. And it says, okay, well, now you're not going to see results and you have to eat even less. So you cannot stay in a cut forever. At some point, you're going to need to work those calories back up and give your body a rest. You might be wondering how you determine the amount you move your calories up by or how often you should do it, which are extremely valid questions. When it comes to a reverse diet, you're not going to be really seeing very many physical changes during this time. Unless you're someone that's starting off this journey under eating, typically, yes. In this case, when you go through a reverse diet, you oftentimes will see some physical changes in progress photos. Because, funny thing, when you give your body the food it wants and needs, it thanks you for that a lot of the time. Just like when you continually give it less and less, it does the opposite of what you want it to do. But when you fuel it well, it will typically thank you by showing you some progress in your physique. But otherwise, if you're already kind of starting off at a decent place with your calories or are starting your reverse from a cutting phase, a lot of the time we won't really see physical changes. But that's not the point of this phase. The progress that happens during a reverse is internal. Again, by slowly increasing calories over a longer time span, you're teaching your body to utilize those extra calories coming in without really gaining body fat back. So, going through a reverse, you're not typically going to see changes on the scale. You're probably going to stay mostly consistent here, but again, this is what we want. If you're seeing the scale jump up rapidly, that means you're adding in too many calories too quickly and you need to slow down a little. This is how you determine the amount and frequency at which you add calories back in. Going back to our example from earlier, you add in 50 calories and are now eating 1,750 calories a day, and you keep it there for a week. During that week, you're listening to your biofeedback and seeing how your body reacts and what is happening on the scale. If a week later everything looks good, you feel good, the scale hasn't changed outside of normal daily fluctuations, then you're probably safe to add in another 50 calories. So you go on up to 1,800 calories a day and you sit there for a week. But then you feel like your weight is fluctuating around more than usual, so you decide to give it another week at the same 1,800 intake. Another week goes by, things have leveled out on the scale and you're feeling good, so you decide to move up again. If you want, you could try moving up by 100 calories and see what happens. This is all trial and error, but you want to take it slow and then just wait and see how your body reacts. Some people will probably need to move up slower than others. This just comes down to you and your body. So you always want to reverse diet out of your cuts until you reach your maintenance, and then from there, decide what you want to do. Do you want to just maintain for a little while? Do you want to go into a bulk? Do you want to do a body recomposition? Again, this is totally up to you. You could do all of these things over time if you wanted, but it's up to you. What your goals are, how quickly you want to reach them, all of that. I will say that if you end up wanting to go into a bulk and you're currently eating at maintenance, you would just overnight bump up your calories from whatever your maintenance is to whatever your bulk is going to be. So whether that's 2,300, whatever it is. If you're eating 2,000 calories and you're maintaining there, then you would jump up to 22 or 2,300 from one day to the next. Otherwise, if you try to ease into it with a reverse diet, the way you would come out of a cut, then what's probably going to happen is you're just continuing to move your maintenance calories up even higher. Not always, but sometimes, because your metabolism is malleable to a certain extent. We do all have a certain threshold personal to us that our bodies just can't keep up regulating past a certain point, but we do have the ability to increase our maintenance calories to an extent. So if you were to just keep reverse dieting up past your maintenance, there's a good chance that you're just up regulating your metabolism so that your new maintenance calories are higher than what they previously were, which isn't a bad thing if this is what you want to do. If you want to have a higher caloric intake during your bulk, you could do this, but if not, then you would just jump straight into a bulk so your body recognizes the fact that it now has extra calories coming in and it can utilize those to build muscle. Those are the different phases of this journey that you could potentially find yourself in. Again, there is no one way to go about these. While it is common to see people usually in either a cut or a bulk, this doesn't mean that this is what you have to do. Usually, you'll see a lot of people cutting in the summer since they're usually going to the beach or just wearing less clothes in general, so they want to be a little leaner. And then they'll bulk during the winter months when not only is it nice to have some extra calories during the end of the year when all the festivities are happening, but it's also colder out and they're more bundled up. Unless you're like me and you live in Florida where it's pretty much always warm out. But really, there is no rule that says you can only cut in the summer and bulk in the winter. This is just what people typically do. They like to line up their phases with the seasons and with what's going on in their lives. I hope this helped explain each of these phases a little better and the purpose behind each of them so that you can make an informed choice when it comes to what phase you want to be in and what results you'll get because of it.